Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Sam Slot33 here, and welcome back to the show that has nothing to do with mix-up whatsoever. Back to reality, where we talk about, actual stuff that you care about, like metagame decks and tournament reports and all that stuff. And this week, actually not this week, because this is kind of a late episode. I guess it was supposed to go out last week, but I had to do a lot of testing and stuff. Anyway, the deck we're talking about today is Virizion Genesect, a completely new deck from Plasma Blast. And it is definitely a very talked about deck. A lot of people are unsure if it's good or bad. So this is definitely going to be a very opinionated episode. I'm going to tell you what I think about the deck, and that is going to happen right now. But first of all, before I say that, I must tell you that I did get a new microphone. This bad boy right here, the Logitech something. Yeah, it's okay. Better than my last one. The last one kind of sucked. But yeah, you will definitely see an improvement in audio quality in this episode. So anyway, let's get to the part where you see the audio quality improve right now. Plasma Blast was an interesting set, to say the least, and all everyone is talking about is Virizion EX and Genesect EX. With every set, there's always got to be that new big deck, and this is one of the more controversial ones. It's so controversial that it has dawned, by me, the risque name of Virgin. Ha 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 ha. So let's take a closer look at the two cards and see what all the fuss is about. Virizion has both a great ability and attack. Its ability, Verdant Wind, says that all of your Pokemon with grass energy can't be affected by special conditions. Whoa, so Hypnotoxic Laser does nothing now? Cool. Obviously one of the main reasons this deck is so powerful. Something tells me this isn't the only deck Verdant Wind will be used in. Its attack is a very nice bonus as well. Emerald Slash costs 1 grass and 1 colorless, and does 50 damage, and you can search your deck for up to 2 grass energy and attach them to one of your bench Pokemon. While it does have a nice effect, it does cost 2 energy, and it just gives you 2 energy to put onto Genesect. As for Genesect, it also has an attack and an ability, but Genesect's ability isn't exactly something to base your deck around. Red Signal states that when you attach a plasma energy to this Pokemon, you may switch the defending Pokemon with one of his or her bench Pokemon. So basically, it's a Pokemon catcher every time you attach a plasma to Genesect. While yes, it's a nice ability, if you're playing Colorless Machine, you're not going to want to attach a plasma energy to Genesect, since Genesect's attack only has 1 colorless energy in it. But if you're not using Colorless Machine, Red Signal can come in handy a few times. Its attack is called Megalocan, which costs 2 grass and 1 colorless, and does 100 damage and 20 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. A very similar attack to Night Spear, except it swaps 10 damage from the bench to 10 damage to the active. Honestly, I think it's a downgrade from Night Spear. When hitting something twice with Megalocannon, it does 200 damage, more health than anything has, so really it doesn't help to add that extra 10 damage. Darkrai also has better supporting cards, so why is Genesect even a good card? Well, for one, it has 2 Ace-Spec tool cards. One isn't going to be used in any of the decks we're going to talk about, so let's just look at the good one, G-Booster. G-Booster, when attached to Genesect, gives it a new attack, also named G-Booster. This attack does 200 damage, is unaffected by any effects on the defending Pokemon, but you have to discard 2 energy on Genesect. Now I know what you might be thinking. You're only ever going to use that once because of Tool Scrapper, and if you're forced to attach it before your Genesect is powered up, you won't be able to use it at all, just like with all those other Pokemon-specific Ace-Specs. Well, that's not the case with this one. This one is a Team Plasma card, which means it can be gotten back by a simple supporter, Shadow Triad. That's what makes this card so good. But with very little energy acceleration, having to discard 2 energy is a pain in the butt a lot of the times. Now that you know all the main cards in the deck, what else can we include in the deck? Well, that's about it. Aside from maybe a non-EX or a non-Plasma tech, these two usually work best by themselves. Now you may be able to see why this deck is mocked for being overhyped. Powering up Virizion takes 2 turns, Genesect's main attack is an inferior Night Spear, and the main power of the deck is a one-off card that discards a ton of energy in a deck that has to manually attach most of its energy. While it doesn't have the speed of Plasma or the power of Blastoise, it has some nice utility in the form of Verdant Wind and Red Signal. And it has a lot of room for a lot of really good cards that other decks don't have the room for. Let's take a look at a few ways to build the deck. The first is the super simplified version. No text, no gimmicks, just manual attachments and lots of Eviolites. This list was inspired by the one that won a Battle Carnival in Japan a while ago, which also included Energy Switch, which we don't have anymore, sadly. The source of this list is the same guy who always has Japanese list, Asa Gentunin from the deck out. Random side note, Asa has recently retired the deck out. I will definitely miss it and all those awesome Japanese lists it provides, but I'm happy for Asa for moving on with his life. Virizion is obviously your favorite starter, which is why I included 4 of them. I originally had 4 Genesect as well, but I took out one of them for a Team Plasma Ball, since it can be searched out by Skyla without the discard effect of Ultra Ball. 4 of them is never really needed, and I run Town Map in this list, so prizing one isn't usually an issue. I also included 1 Tropius from Plasma Blast. I needed some sort of non-EX and non-Plasma attacker to deal with the likes of Suicune and Silver Mirror. Its energy press attack is conveniently good against Suicune, and its most common partner, Terrakion, since they both use a large amount of energy and are both weak to grass. Turn is also good to get you out of bad hands or ends to 1 or 2. Moving on to the supporters, we have the standard 4N and 4 Juniper, and a single Bianca, just to increase the supporter count. We also have 3 Skyla. This deck is very low maintenance, so the single card Skyla gets you as opposed to the several cards N and Juniper get you works just fine too. And the deck has enough space to include cards like Energy Search and Team Plasma Ball that make Skyla so versatile. We also have the 3 Shadow Triad, mostly to get back G-Booster, but it's also a fairly strong card, being able to get back Genesect and Plasma Energy, as well as the next supporter we're going to be talking about, Getsis. 2 of them, in fact. Getsis is not a widely played card, and when it is played, it's usually just 1, so why does this deck have 2 of them? Well, originally, I included it as a supporter you could get back with Shadow Triad, but I've grown to like it on its own. As I've said several times, the deck is so low maintenance that only drawing 2 to 3 cards with your supporter is worth it if you're disrupting your opponent. It's also incredibly powerful against Darkrai. I've played a few games where I've Getsis my opponent's entire hand away, or gained information to choose my next play. I've tried out Chorus, and here is another supporter you can get back with Shadow Triad, and I didn't like it all that much. Your bench is never really that big, so you're not drawing many cards with it. Even though you never need that many cards, if I was desperate enough to get back a supporter with Shadow Triad, it probably wouldn't help me all that much. Eviolite is a nice card in this deck. Since your opponent can't play lasers, Eviolite turns a lot of your Pokemon into tanks. With Virizion's water resistance, Kyurem has a hard time hurting it at all. Darkrai also isn't very fond of them. If they're in the right place at the right time, Darkrai's bench damage gets nerfed to the point where it almost does nothing. It can get in the way of G-Booster on occasion, but you shouldn't be getting all of your knockouts with G-Booster anyway. I like the high-ish Ultra Ball count, so you can get Virizion in play ASAP, because attaching to it turn 1 is so essential. And if you already have Virizion out, it can make sure Emerald Slash is getting energy onto your bench Pokemon. Even though this deck has Sky Arrow Bridge to retreat your Pokemon, Switch is still a decent card in this deck. Sometimes, Sky Arrow Bridge will be helpful to your opponent as well, so Switch doesn't give your opponent the 1 less retreat that Sky Arrow does. There's also very rare situations where your active Pokemon becomes asleep, and you don't want to attach an energy to it, so Sky Arrow won't be of any help, because your active is asleep. Energy Search is very good in this deck. With the high Skyla count, it's too good not to play. Having the option to search for an energy with Skyla is what makes Skyla so versatile. It's like if Roseanne's Research was back, but worse. Super Rod is a card that always seems to be useful in this deck. Usually you get back 3 grass energy with it, and maybe a Genesect or a Tropius. Emerald Slash and G-Booster usually burn through your grass energy very fast, and without Super Rod, you usually end up running out of them before the game ends. So Super Rod is a card I definitely won't be taking out anytime soon. Town Map is a card we never see. Ever. The only time Town Map has been played was in Gothitelle Selgor, but very rarely. The reason it's in this deck is for G-Booster. If it's hidden within your last few prizes, get ready for a bumpy game ahead of you. Having Genesect prize is also problematic, so Town Map is definitely a welcome addition to this deck. Tool Scrapper is, what, the 4th one-off item in this deck? With so many tool cards running around like Silver Mirror, Silver Bangle, and Floatstone, one Tool Scrapper is never a bad card in this deck. While Silver Mirror doesn't completely lock you down, since Virizion is in Plasma and G-Booster hits through Silver Mirror, it can be somewhat problematic since both Emerald Slash and G-Booster are less reliable than Megalo Cannon. It can also be used to get an Eviolite off of a Genesect to make room for G-Booster, or Tool Scrapper your own G-Booster off a Genesect with either not enough energy, or is very heavily damaged, and then use Shadow Triad to get it back onto a new Genesect. Sky Arrow Bridge is your stadium of choice in this deck. I guess Plasma Frigate would also be okay as well, as a way to stop Victini from steamrolling you. Every Pokemon in this deck has 1 retreat. There are no cards that only work on bench Pokemon such as Dark Patch. You don't have to worry about getting out of special conditions, so Sky Arrow really is perfect for this deck. Our energy count is 11 grass energy and 3 plasma energy. You definitely need a lot of energy for this deck, or you'll run out quickly due to Emerald Slash, getting so many out of the deck. The Plasma Energy are used for Red Signal, which I have found to come in handy several times. It also works very well with Shadow Triad, since you can basically get an energy and a catcher automatically by playing one supporter. Finally, we get to the results, and for our first attempt, I'm not crazy about it. It's too slow, it's not very powerful, and doesn't have very many offensive options. The only thing I did like about it is how consistent it was. It almost never gets an unusable hand, since all you need is an energy and a Virizion in the first few turns. With both Catcher and Red Signal, I never had a problem hitting the more threatening Pokemon on the bench. Even though this one didn't work out very well, we still have plenty of variants to go. The next version uses a card that's pretty obvious to include, Chorus Machine. Getting an extra energy attachment is always a very good thing. Even though it's great for Genesect, Virizion is not a Plasma Pokemon, which is very disappointing because Emerald Slash costs 1 Grass and 1 Colorless. So to fix that, I added Team Plasma Badge, which makes the Pokemon it's attached to a Plasma Pokemon. If you can pull off the golden combo of Virizion, Grass Energy, Plasma Badge, Chorus Machine, Genesect, you get a serious advantage and put on a lot more early pressure. Here's the deck list I've been using. This list is pretty similar to the last one. I took out the Eviolites, a Bianca, an Ultra Ball, and a Grass for 3 Chorus Machine, 3 Plasma Badge, and a Plasma Energy. Chorus Machine and Plasma Badge start becoming dead cards really fast, so including 4 of each would ruin the consistency this deck has a monopoly on. With this variant, I definitely saw a huge improvement. The Chorus Machine's extra attachment was incredibly helpful on Genesect, but getting Turn 1 Virizion didn't happen very often. I think I only got it once, and that was after my opponent mulliganed 6 or 7 times. I feel like it should have happened at least a few more times. It's only 5 cards, one of which is your starter. Even without that, the deck becomes a lot faster, enough to actually outspeed your opponent sometimes and apply some pressure. And best of all, it was still very consistent. One thing that happened a lot was having to manually attach Plasma Energy to Virizion to get a turn to Emerald Slash, which makes it less likely you'll be able to use Red Signal and weakens your Chorus Machines. So Virizion isn't all hype after all. Well, we've still got a few lists to go. Next up, we're going to try adding some power to this deck. Other than G-Booster, the deck is incredibly weak compared to other decks. If we want to stick with just Virizion and Genesect, our options are Hypnotoxic Laser and Burbank City Gym and Deoxys. Deoxys only works on Genesect, it's a terrible starter, it has 2 retreat, and you have to run a lot of them to have any impact on the game, so Deoxys would seem worse. But it doesn't work against the mirror match. But I think Hypnotoxic Lasers are still superior, so we're going to be using those, at least for now. With Laser and Burbank in play, a lot of Pokemon end up in knockout range of a lot of combos. An Emerald Slash, Megalo Cannon, and Laser Burbank is enough to knock out any EX. Laser Burbank and Megalo Cannon, or 2 Emerald Slash, one-shots Plasma Kyurem. Megalo Cannon / 2 Emerald Slash and Laser one-shots Victini EX. Emerald Slash / Laser Burbank one-shots Terrakion due to weakness. A lot of hard-to-take-down Pokemon can be killed by simply an Emerald Slash and a Megalo Cannon. It's definitely got to add something to the deck. Here's the list. With the Burbanks in this deck, I was forced to cut Sky Arrow Bridge, since I don't like the idea of having conflicting stadiums. So in its place, I've upped the switch count to 4. Even without Sky Arrow, everything still only has 1 retreat, so catcher stalling isn't a huge hole in the entire deck strategy or anything like that. 4 switch is definitely plenty. Your opponent is always going to be going after your Pokemon with energy, so they won't be catcher stalling unless they're very desperate. And hey, I run 4 switching cards in my Plasma list, so there's no reason I should run any more, really. So starting with this list, I haven't extensively tested the decks. I simply ran out of time doing this video, since I had to test so many lists against so many decks that I just couldn't get it all done in time. Well, I've played 3 games against Darkrai and 1 against Plasma, and my win ratio is 4-0. So that says something, I guess. The only thing I could see being a problem in the future is drawing lasers required me to play a lot more supporters than I usually do. And I don't mean play as in playing a certain number of cards in my deck, I mean playing a card during a match. With most of the other lists, I didn't need to play a supporter every turn, since you really don't need much every turn. Now that I have lasers, I want to draw into those every turn, which makes me play more supporters, which can make you fizzle out in the end more. I also didn't have Burbank in play all that often, which basically defeats the purpose of lasers entirely. Alright, next list, go. You may have noticed I haven't talked about one of Virgin's most common techs, Drifblim. It was in the other Virgin list that won a Battle Carnival, and it's very commonly talked about when Virgin discussion starts up. And I haven't mentioned it once. Well, for those of you who don't know, there are not one, but two Drifblims that are good in this deck, and both are used against Plasma decks. The first one came out back in Dragons Exalted, and was actually used in Dylan Bryan's Flareon, a crap ton of other stuff deck that got top 16 at Worlds this year. Its attack, Shadow Steel, costs 1 colorless energy, and does 50 damage times the number of special energy in your opponent's discard. Since Plasma usually plays 12 to 14 special energy, this attack is very good, especially with the Psychic weakness that the Oxus EX has. And Drifblim doesn't even have a Psychic weakness. It does, however, have a Dark weakness, which isn't good when dealing with Absol, and it's totally useless against Darkrai, so it doesn't matter what it's weak to in that matchup. But it doesn't stop there. The other Drifblim is also very powerful. Its ability, Drifting Balloon, states that this Pokemon takes 1 less energy to attack for each Plasma Pokemon your opponent has in play. And its attack, Derail, does 70 damage for 3 colorless energy, and discards a special energy attached to the defending Pokemon. So much special energy hate with these Drifblims. Well, these things seem quite good against Plasma, don't they? But the problem is they're really bad against everything else. Well, not everything. The Shadow Steel one is okay against other Virgin decks that heavily focus on Plasma or Colress Machine. Other than that, maybe Flareon and Silver Mirror decks since they run DCE. But everything else, it's totally useless. Darkrai, Blastoise, Darkrai Garbodor, it's just not remotely helpful. So yeah, if you want to beat Plasma, but abandon every other matchup, Drifblim is for you. Here's the list for it. So this one I haven't used at all, so don't go taking this to a tournament or anything. I'm running 3 Drifloon, 2 Plasma Blast Drifblim, and 1 Dragon's Exalted Drifblim, or as I like to call them, the Drifter and the Thief respectively. So we've got the Virgin, the Drifter, and the Thief. Why do I do this to you guys? Really. The Drifloon you choose can end up mattering. This one from Dragon's Exalted has 60 HP, 1 retreat, and an attack that does 10 for 1. This one from Plasma Blast has 70 HP, 2 retreat, and an attack that does 40 to a bench Pokemon for 3 colorless. The 70 HP one is tempting since it's harder to donk by Sableye, which is very possible with Drifloon, but its 2 retreat is just so unappealing. Everything except the Thief has 0 retreat with Skyroar in play, so having this stupid thing that you have to play a switch to get a turn to Emerald Slash is just so bad. I don't want this thing in my deck, at all. The Drifter is the one you want to use against Plasma most of the time. The Thief is mostly for cleanup, but the Thief is a lot better against Virgin decks, so it depends on the matchup really. For the supporters, my Bianca that I sometimes have in this deck is replaced by Caitlyn. My idea for including Caitlyn is that Drifloon, Drifblim, and Enhanced Hammer are dead cards in a lot of matchups, so Caitlyn will be able to put them on the bottom of your deck, getting them out of the way, and simultaneously drawing more cards with Caitlyn. As I just said, Enhanced Hammer has also been added to the list. I figured I'd just go for broke against the Plasma matchup, and just hammer and derail our energy to death. It also helps the Thief to work on its own without needing the Drifter to derail a few of their energy. I'd also like to try Silver Bangle in this deck, because it allows both Drifblims to hit a lot more knockouts. A Derail with the Bangle on Deoxys one-shots it, and Shadow Steel now one-shots the X's with 3 energy in the discard, as opposed to 4. So if Enhanced Hammer doesn't work out, I'll find some room for them. So not much more to say about it. Haven't played much of it, so there's not much else to say. On to our next list. This one has a funky idea. That's not tested, but you know, YOLO. Virizion does 50 damage, right? Well, let's try a list that uses attackers that do 120 damage, enough to one-shot a lot of EXs, with the 50 from Emerald Flash. I picked out 2 attackers for that job, and they are Bouffalant and Lugia EX. These 2 both give the deck new approaches on different situations, and give it more options. Bouffalant has the attack Goldbreaker, which does 60 damage for 3 colorless energy, and if it's attacking an EX Pokemon, does 60 more damage. And it also has the ability Boofer, which reduces all the damage done to it by 20. Bouffalant is a lot better of a non-EX attacker than Tropius, which provides a lot of early pressure and forces your opponent to deal with it, which makes your opponent have to take essentially 7 prizes, which basically means if your opponent knocks out a non-EX Pokemon, and that's the only non-EX Pokemon they have the option to knock out, they'll have to knock out 3 EXs, which means them knocking out that non-EX Pokemon didn't get them any further to taking all 6 prizes. And while Bouffalant is more defensive, Lugia is very, very offensive. Lugia's ability lets you take another prize every time Lugia knocks out a Pokemon, and its attack does 120 damage per 4 colorless energy, and you have to discard a Plasma energy attached to Lugia, or the attack does nothing. So Emerald Flash followed by a Plasma Gale lets you take 3 prizes on the 3rd turn, with Colress Machine of course. This may be a little bit of a gimmicky idea, but hey, plenty of gimmicks have done well, and this is an entirely new deck, so why not experiment? Here's a list we'll be working with. Since Lugia is pretty situational, and it has 2 retreat, there's only one of them in here. I took out Switch and Skyro for a retreating card we haven't seen in any of my lists yet, Floatstone. With Buffalon and Lugia having a 2 retreat cost, Skyro Bridge isn't much of help anymore, so I think Floatstone is going to be the best card out of the 3. The grass energy count is quite low in this list, and that's because I'm making room for double colorless energy. Lugia and Buffalon both use all colorless energy, so double colorless is like 2 energy attachments in 1. No reason not to include those. Well, DCE actually has another hidden use, which involves G-Booster. When Genesect uses the G-Booster attack, it has to discard 2 energy, which can a lot of the time prevent you from using 2 G-Boosters in a row. Well, if you can attach a DCE to your Genesect with G-Booster, you can discard the DCE as your 2 energy, so you just have to attach 1 energy a turn, and along with Colress Machine, it's easily possible to use 3 G-Boosters in a row for the win. Seems pretty neat, right? This is another list I haven't tested, so this is where the discussion about this deck ends. And finally, we come to the last deck list. This one is another deck that a lot of people have been playing, and one of the best players at my league is primarily using it. And that deck is Virizion with Prism Energy, and a lot of techs. I haven't tested this deck, but I hate the concept. It makes Emerald Slash a waste of an attack, which is one of the best parts of the deck. It does give the deck more options though, and allows it to adapt to more situations, like Plasma. Sort of. The deck does kind of turn into a Plasma Virizion hybrid, which can be a good thing, but it will also get wrecked by Driftblim and Sableye Hammer Spam. Anyway, here's a list I'll be starting with once I get around to testing it. This list has a hefty amount of the Axis CX, since with this list, you're mostly going to be attacking with Plasma Pokemon, and even 10 extra damage can help out Genesect reach some magic numbers. The Thundurus is there as a way to accelerate energy for less energy than Virizion, and lets you get them back from the discard if you're running low. The Absol is just there as a non-EX attacker pretty much. It's also a really solid card in general. It does more damage for 2 energy than anything else in the deck. Except the Axis if your opponent has enough energy on their Pokemon, which doesn't happen very often. For the supporters, I added more Colress and Bianca, reducing the Skyla and Shadow Triad counts, and dropped Getsis altogether. I changed them to adapt to this deck's faster and more impulse-based playstyle. With more options at your disposal, you're going to need to see more cards of your deck. Other than the Shadow Triads, this is the same supporter line as my Plasma list, plus Dowsing Machine, but the Shadow Triads make up for that. I've re-added the Plasma badge into this deck, because it adds more options to the deck and leaves Virizion with some sort of use. Until I've tested this deck more extensively, I can't say it's a bad deck, but hopefully it's not. Some cards that could be included in any of these lists are Shiny Virizion / Virizion NV. It can deal alright damage and use Double Draw to draw cards. So basically it's Tropius with more HP, a different weakness, and worse attacks. Max Potion. I've found several situations where Max Potion would be perfect. Usually if something has a lot of damage, even if it has a lot of energy, you abandon it because it will get knocked out and you'll lose all your energy. So being able to Max Potion that would have saved me so many games. EXP Share. With no energy acceleration, EXP Share would actually be a nice way to do that. Reversal Trigger. With Laser not working on you, the only way your opponent would be able to get rid of them is through Tool Scrapper, which means they can no longer Tool Scrapper your G-Booster. Speaking of, Reversal Trigger could also help you search out G-Booster. And that's about it for all the cards you could include in here. And now for the deck's matchups. Most of the matchups depend on how well the opponent sets up, since your deck usually sets up the same every time. The Plasma matchup depends on if they can apply enough early pressure with Kyurem. If you can stabilize and power up a Genesect or 2, you can take out the Kyurems and finish them off with G-Booster, and a couple Megalo Cannons. Usually what you want to hit with your first Emerald Flashes are Kyurems, since you can follow up with a Megalo Cannon and those things won't bother you for very long. Try to keep unnecessary stuff off your bench so Absol does less damage. The 20 damage from Megalo Cannon can also matter sometimes. You should usually hit a Thundurus or a Deoxys with it. Then you can hit it with an Emerald Slash and a Megalo Cannon to knock it out. If they're unable to use Kyurem or Absol, they'll go for Helix Force, which does quite a bit of damage, unless you've used G-Booster that turn. And don't forget to knock out Keldeo if they bench it, because of its grass weakness. The Colress Machine version and the Driftblim version are best against Plasma. Straight Darkrai is a weird matchup. Usually if they Night Spear you with a Dark Claw a few times, they're going to win. With all of your EXs having 170 HP, they can just put damage on all your Pokemon that threaten them, and you don't have much you can do about it. But if you can take out their energy first with G-Booster, then you can end up winning. You can also sock it to them hard with Getsis and shuffle their random receivers, and they don't have any supporters anymore. This has happened multiple times, and I expect it to happen many more times. The best version against this is the laser version, not only because Megalo Cannon's 100, Megalo Cannon's 20, and an Emerald Slash doesn't knock out a Darkrai, and you have to use Emerald Slash, Megalo Cannon, / Laser Bank to knock out a Darkrai efficiently, but also the fact that the Darkrai player may play Verbank themselves, which makes your lasers more effective. If they're playing smart, they probably won't play it down, but most Virgin decks don't play laser, so they may not realize it in time. The Colress Machine version has the problem of your Plasma Energy getting discarded by Enhanced Hammer. Blastoise is one I sadly have not tested, mostly because it does me nothing to test a Blastoise deck that has Tropical Beach because I can never afford them, and it doesn't help me to test against the Blastoise list without Tropical Beach, because no one's going to play it. But it seems like an interesting one, and it's hard to theorize about. Everything in the Blastoise deck except Black Kyurem is weak to Grass, so knocking out Squirtles and Keldeos is really easy. But with Black Kyurem EX, they can one-shot your Pokemon that has any energy on it, so like a lot of matchups, it depends on how well your opponent sets up. It's probably best just to ignore Black Kyurems and go after Blastoise and Keldeo. The Colress Machine version is probably best against Blastoise. Darkrai Garbodor is yet another matchup I haven't tested. I assume it's similar to the Darkrai matchup, but instead of having the speed, it goes for the power of Hypnotoxic Laser, since Garbodor shuts off Verdant Wind. I'd say it's a worse matchup because it's harder for you to get out of Poison, but it's still winnable because of Getsist and Laser, if you're running them. Tool Scrapper is also your friend. Suicune Terrakion is the last deck I'm going to cover, and I know I really don't seem experienced when I say this, but I haven't tested this matchup. I know I have barely tested any matchup, but it's hard proofreading these lists and making sure they're okay. I don't have time to test all this stuff, and this may shock you, but I don't have very many friends I can play Pokemon with whenever I want. But anyway, I think this is a winnable matchup. You basically have to find a way to get 6 knockouts. Your options are G-Booster, Tropius, and if you're using Genesect against Terrakion, 1 Tool Scrapper. To reuse those, you have 3 Shadow Triad and 1 Super Ride. You can also KO Terrakions with Virizion, so you should be able to get all 6 prizes. Their attacks are fairly weak, so you should have plenty of time, but not infinite. Flareon Drifblim Garbodor is another one I haven't tested, but I barely even consider it a metagame deck, so I just kinda added this part at the last minute. While yes, everything in your deck is weak to fire, Flareon won't be able to one-shot them for a while. If they're not running Landorus or Terrakion, they're probably playing Fire Energy as their basic energy type, which can allow them to Heat Tackle your deck to death, then finish off with Vengeance after they have enough Pokemon in their discard. I think it really depends on if they're running Fire Energy. If they're not, then Vengeance will barely do anything at the start, and you can set up multiple Genesect, and eventually they'll miss a beat and you'll take out their EVs and Flareons, or Leafeon if they use it. Overall, it's for the most part the same as every other matchup. If they're slow to set up, you'll win, but if not, then you'll lose. And there you go, that's my opinion on Virizion Genesect. I definitely think it is a viable deck and that we will be seeing more of it, especially since it did alright at the Klasinski Open, which is the first, independent tournament that has been hosted by someone that's not Pokemon, and definitely very looked at tournament. And who's actually won by someone who I have faced in tournament before, Lex D'Andrea. If you go back to one of my regionals reports, I did face him. So that's congratulations to Lex for winning that Klasinski Open. It's awesome. As a senior, won the 15 and above age division. I'm really excited about that. Shows that seniors really aren't that bad of players, even though I'm a master now. So, I don't care about seniors anymore. Ha! You seniors suck. Nah, I'm just kidding. You guys are awesome, especially Lex. He's awesome. But anyway. Next episode of I don't really know what I have to do left. I would like to do an episode on the format and what changes have been made to it and such. I'd definitely like to look at some of the other decks we have right now, like we have Blastoise and Darkrai Garbodor, maybe even Flareon. Some of those decks I'd like to look at. I have a few rogue decks lined up. I don't really think they're that great. I might just not play them at all, but I definitely have some ideas that I want to try out. And I'll let you guys know how they work out in mix-up episodes in the future. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Later.